really good to be here in church this evening, singing wonderful songs, and it's good to see all of you here this evening. I just want to say a big thank you to Val Turner, who week by week she takes my notes and she tries to put them into some order so that you can pick them up at reception, and she sends them out to people. And technology is amazing, because you know me, often I kind of talk away from my notes and I go down a certain line, and poor old Val has to sit at home looking at the YouTube, and it has to be transcribed, and then she's got to type it all up, and you do a wonderful job, Val. And I thank God for YouTube, and well done. Give her a round of applause. Last week, I think she had an extra special task because we covered quite a lot, and there was a lot of different stuff in it. And I've gone through my notes this evening, and I think we'll be about on track, Val, I think. But you never know what's going to happen, the inspirations that you get on the stage as you're going through this and entering into the story. So welcome back to the part 2 of Cain and Abel, the new Bible study series that we're doing here at Salt Church. And I really do hope that last week you enjoyed the context, because we looked at Genesis chapters 1 to 3, didn't we? We covered quite a lot of stuff, and we didn't really speak at all about Cain and Abel. It was all the background leading into our story to set the scene. So we've done quite a lot on context. And actually, even this evening, we're going to do a little bit more context, although we have arrived at chapter 4, and we will be reminding ourselves by reading the story. Now, last week we looked at the origins. You know that Genesis means origins, and we touched on the origins of the heavens and the earth, the origins of the Garden of Eden. We looked in a little bit of detail at our common ancestor, which I find fascinating, mitochondrial Eve, the literal Eve, I believe, of the Bible. And I learned something new last week: Y chromosomal Adam, the literal Adam of the Bible. And I'm just amazed that, and I have the faith that the Bible is true, and that all that science eventually will do is prove the Bible actually to be true. And it does seem to be doing that in many ways in our day and age. We looked also in Genesis, of course, at the origins of the fall and the judgments of God. The serpent, Eve, Adam, the ground. And we also saw the origins of the grace of God. God is full of grace, he always has been. But the first time he showed his grace to humanity was indeed to Adam and Eve, when he killed an animal, sacrificed an animal, shedding his blood, so that he could cover their sin with the animal's skins, because they realized they were naked and they were ashamed. They were naked, as we say, and they were ashamed. And we also saw the origins of God's judgment on sin, the banishment of Adam and Eve. Death has come into the system. Shalom, the shalom and shalom, peace with God, is broken. The shalom between God and man is broken. The shalom between man and woman is broken. And the shalom with oneself was broken. So peace has been broken, and strife and death has come into the system. And so now we come to Genesis chapter 4, which is after the banishment, and it's the first story that we get after the banishment. It is a fresh start. It is a new start, not in the Garden of Eden, but actually outside of the Garden of Eden. And it's a new start for the human race, and 2 boys are born. Last week I threw out a teaser. I told you that they are twins, and you might not have known they were twins, but I'll be covering that this evening and telling you why I think they are twins. And I believe Cain was the elder twin and Abel the younger twin. So we've now arrived at the story of Cain and Abel, the story of the first twins, the first brothers, the first worship of God that goes so terribly wrong, the first murder that was very wrong. So let us read the story coming up on your screens. Oops. I hope you can, big enough to read, I hope. Here we go. Genesis chapter 4, 1 to 16. It's a new beginning, it's a new start. Straight after being exiled from the garden, it says this: Adam lay with his wife Eve, and she became pregnant, and she gave birth to Cain. And that's the special dance that we spoke about last week that I thank Andy Neal for. And she said, with the help of the Lord, I have brought forth a man. Later, she gave birth to his brother Abel. Now Abel kept flocks, and Cain worked the soil. In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. But Abel brought fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry, and his face was cast down. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must master it." Now Cain said to his brother Abel, "Let's go out to the field." And while they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" "I don't know," he replied. "Am I my brother's keeper?" The Lord said, "What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Now you are under a curse and driven from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth." Cain said to the Lord, "My punishment is more than I can bear. Today you are driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. I will be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me." But the Lord said to him, "Not so. If anyone kills Cain, he will suffer vengeance 7 times over." Then the Lord put a mark on Cain, so that no one who found him would kill him. So Cain went out from the Lord's presence and lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden. This is the word of the Lord. Amen. So it doesn't matter how many times you read a passage, when you read it again and you read it afresh, and particularly for me standing here speaking it out loud, I've seen at least 2 or 3 things I've never seen before. So I will have to go back and research those for another time. We are not going to cover the whole story this evening. There's too much in it. So what we are going to do is do a little bit more background into who is Cain and Abel. Were they the firstborn children of Adam and Eve? They were brothers, as I've said, but they were twins. And that does give a twist to the story. What were their characters like? What were the people like? What was Cain and Abel like? Why did Cain accept Abel's offering? Why did God accept Abel's offering and not Cain's? And what did Cain mean when he said, "Am I my brother's keeper?" Does it mean that we are to look after one another in the Lord? Are we my brothers and sisters' keeper? There are many questions, and hopefully there will be many answers. Now they do say that a picture tells 1,000 words. And I sought long and hard to find a picture that I thought actually expressed what was going on in the story. And here on our screen is a picture of the story. Cain is on the left. He's downcast. He's very upset. He's hiding his face away. And Cain's elbow, you can see, is on the altar. And there is Abel's burnt offering. It's a pleasing offering unto the Lord. And then in our picture, there is Abel on the right. To me, I don't know to you, but to me, he looks quite pious. He looks quite satisfied. He looks quite holy and reverent. Or is it his attitude, "I'm better than you, Cain. I have beaten you on this one"? How do you interpret art? How do you interpret pictures? How do we interpret scripture? And so this was an intriguing picture for me, because I think it is telling a bit of a story in picture form. And I do wonder whether Cain had some sibling rivalry and is feeling quite satisfied that Abel was feeling that, and that he has beaten his elder brother Cain. You see, I guess that we've been taught, really, that Cain is the bad one. Certainly, he has ended up doing terrible things. But traditionally, I think we've been taught, I've always thought, Cain's the bad one, Abel is the good one. Is that totally the story? Is that the true case? What can we glean from the text, and what can we glean, and will it give us a better understanding of the story? Last week I spoke that I was going to bring some of the Hebrew thinking into this story of Cain and Abel, because there's quite a few interesting ideas, quite a few interesting explanations of the background to this story, which perhaps we haven't heard before. So who were Cain and Abel? And were they the first children of Adam and Eve? And I guess the answer is going to be, Will we ever know for sure? It certainly seems that they were, and it definitely appears that they were the first males born after the fall. And the reason why I say this is in the text. Eve states that with the help of the Lord, she has brought forth a man, Cain. So perhaps without the help of the Lord, she had already brought forth girls, daughters. And it says here, Adam did the special dance with his wife Eve, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. She said, with the help of the Lord, I have brought forth a man. So I don't know how long they might have been trying for male children. Later, she gave birth to his brother Abel. So it seems that either they did not have children up until that point, and they needed the Lord's help to have any children, or perhaps in the Garden of Eden, Eve only had female children. Remember God's curse on Eve. One of her punishments was increased pain in childbirth. So, were some female children born in the Garden of Eden? In which case, if there were, we have another issue, because when Adam ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, all those on the earth at that time, if there were children, if they'd had children, their eyes would have been opened. And this is because the fall depended on Adam eating. So when Adam ate, then Eve's eyes were opened. If there were any other people around, when Adam ate, all humans' eyes would have been opened and sin would have entered. But we know definitely that the birth of Cain and Abel is after the fall, and therefore we know that it really did hurt Eve in giving birth to them. The curse she experienced, and it would have been painful giving birth to them. Also, when Eve says, with the help of the Lord, I have brought forth a man, she could be referring to God helping her in that pain. All of a sudden, it didn't hurt before, but boy, it really hurts now, and the Lord helped her. It could be that the Lord helped her, it certainly seems that this is the case, to conceive male children, and male children would be necessary to populate the earth. And so we have an intriguing story, and God doesn't necessarily tell us every detail about everything. And sometimes we can glean things from the text. We can also glean things from what is not said, but we can definitely glean things from the original Hebrew, and hopefully some of this will make sense as I go through it with you. So for me, here's a question for us at this stage. How was the earth populated? So many people, they say, well, where did Cain get his wife? You know, where were the people then? Did they really all come from one woman and one man? Well, the mitochondria Eve and the chromosomal Adam suggest that all of the human race has come, indeed, from one woman and one man, and therefore the only way to populate the earth, there is going to be some issues which I want to unpack and hopefully answer some questions that you may well have thought about in the past. As stated, there could have been female children before the fall. That's how population started from Adam and Eve. But there are other Hebrew traditions. One tradition I came across says that each brother, Cain and Abel, was born with a twin sister, whom they later married. That's one thought. Either way, we have to handle the issue, don't we? We have to handle the issue that in our day and age we would call incest. Because to populate the earth from just two people, obviously it needs inter-family union. And of course to us, we go, horror, horror, is that the case then? Let's just unpack this a little bit, because quite often people say, well, where did the other people come from then? Where did Cain get his wife? And hopefully I'm going to answer that question to some degree for you this evening. By a modern legal definition, Cain would have had to have committed incest with one of his sisters who became his wife in order to create offspring, because he had no other choice. That is logical sense if everyone has come from one man and one woman. If the entire human race came from an original pair, then that is completely unavoidable. In fact, it's the logical conclusion. In fact, it's the only solution to the question, where did Cain get his wife? But when we think about biblical standards, we're going back to the very genesis, the very origins of people coming on the earth. When we come to biblical standards, Cain was not breaking any laws because those laws did not exist at that time. God formed woman, from the rib of the man, that a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh. We know that. That's the definition of marriage. In other words, what that is saying is that children and parents that way round are not to have sexual relations with each other or to marry each other. And right from the start, that is an implied principle of God in the garden. Yet, there were no actual laws about incest were given in the unspoilt world of Eden before the fall, total innocence, or even, indeed, before the Exodus. However, as mankind is spreading across the face of the earth, laws are initiated by God, given to Moses, the first covenant, and you get a whole host of laws that God brings down from the mountain to give to the people. And these laws are there for a whole host of reasons, and many of them are obvious. But what is the law in the Bible against incest? And we find it in Leviticus 18:6. No one is to approach any close relative to have sexual relations. I am the Lord. And that is what we operate under. That is the state of the case in today's world. It's wrong. No one is to have close relative sexual relationships. I am the Lord. Before the law came in, where there is no law, there can be no sin. Remember, in the garden, there was one law. Don't eat the apple, bang. Whatever else they were doing is completely legal. God hadn't said anything else to them about how they can live, what they are to do, and what might happen from them, or from the fruit of them. So up until this point, there was no law against what we would call today incest. So Cain, right back in the Genesis, just after, was not subject to the law. The regulations of the law of Moses only became binding upon those to whom it was given at the time. And that was then from the Mount Sinai and forward from there. And indeed, it's where we get most of our moral law in the West, isn't it? Our moral law is coming from the law of Moses, from the Old Covenant, and from the New Covenant. Even so, it's important for me to state that God has never, ever, nor will he ever approve of indiscriminate sexual activity outside of the marriage relationship, and he will never approve of it in any age of human history, including incest. And it strikes at the soundness of family, and since family is central to God's purposes and to his work on earth, his judgment actually is quite fierce on that. And so when we look at the Bible is very clear on the moral standards how people are to live. Now, following the fall, the effects of sin progress within humankind. I don't know if you've ever looked at the ages of men and women, but well, it tends to be the men that are given. Have you ever read the ages of the men through the book of Genesis? He lived 960, and he lived, 420, and you will notice that the ages, as the effects of the fall, the effects of sin, are rapidly increasing in the universe as death is beginning to get a grip and to reign. The ages of the early patriarchs, they rapidly start to decline. And then God comes and fixes it, doesn't he, at, 70, I suppose. He mentions 120, and there's debates, is it 120 or 70, 70. The point is, there is a kind of a maximum life that man can live. And human beings are doing everything to overcome this sickness called death. And actually they're making some progress. They are making some progress. They can take a worm that normally would live for 1 day, and they can enable that worm to live for 3 days. It's amazing. As human beings are looking into the very stuff of creation and manipulating it as if we are God, we can produce amazing things. And, who knows how far they will get. Many of us here are alive today, including myself. I'm very aware of this, because antibiotics existed. And I'm on antibiotics at the moment. But I know that I would have died probably 2 or 3 times over by now if I had not had access to the medical things that human beings have created. Do you know, we are fearfully and wonderfully made. We are an incredible species, and we're pretty tenacious, and we really do like to solve problems and the stuff of life, don't we? And we get a certain way. But the effects of the fall are deep and are profound. And we know today that rather than evolving, DNA over millennia is devolving. We are losing DNA as human beings, and so many of us, I can say that this is true of me, because I actually know what a number of my genetic diseases are. But many of us have genetic diseases, and we do not even know it. The effects of the fall have permeated and have affected to the core of our DNA. And here is a principle that God knows, but within this system of the fall and of sin, within that system, we know that close family relationships accelerates the DNA issue, causing terrible diseases. And so the effects of the fall is to bring in the system within human beings that close family relationships is not a good thing. Interbreeding in families is not a good thing. It does happen over the world in different societies, and actually, it is present in the world. But from God's perspective, it's stopped, it's not healthy, it's not right, and he brings the law into the law of Moses. But before then, Cain's under no such law. There is no such boundary. And in that context, it would not even be sin. It wouldn't have been sinful in his day and age. In our day and age, it's one sinful because it's against God's written law. And number two, it's going to really bring more disease and difficulty to human beings. So it seems to me that from last week, it's obvious that from two people, mitochondrial Eve and Y chromosomal Adam, all the peoples of the earth, including you and me, have come from. So I know my family tree. My family tree is my mum and my dad. I know my grandparents. But I know that I will go back to Noah, and I know I will go back to Adam and Eve. In fact, all of us do. So we have all come from two people, Adam and Eve. Therefore, how does the earth occupied or populated in that day? Before God's law against incest, there must have been interfamilial relationships, but without that dramatic effect in the dangers of the DNA, which have come along later. And I show that by the fact that people died, the effects of sin have increased, and so people were no longer living to 980. I think Methuselah was the longest living man, and the day that Methuselah died was the day it started raining in Noah's day, as God brought the flood upon the earth. So I hope I've given some answer, and I hope I've given a context. Because it's a sensitive subject, it is against God's law in our day and age. But right at the beginning, there was no law. And right at the beginning, if from two people, then Cain wasn't breaking anything, wasn't going wrong, and once the population has grown, then things changed. So were Cain and Abel twins? Were they twins, or were they just brothers? I used to think they were just brothers. I used to think, well, Cain was born, and later, could have meant years later, Abel was born. But is this the case? So were Cain and Abel twins or just brothers? It's a well-known fact that Jacob and Esau were twins, but in Hebrew tradition, Cain and Abel are also twins, and here is the reason why, and the reason why I believe they were in the same womb, and they were twins. And the conclusion that I've come to is based on the normal Hebraic accounting of multiple births, how they record multiple births, and how multiple births are recorded in the Bible. And we have an example coming up. The conception, so this is how the Hebrews would record multiple births. The conception, then the birth of each child is mentioned. For example, we can read this in Genesis 29 about Leah, where it says this: Leah became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She named him Reuben, for she said, "It is because the Lord has seen my misery. Surely my husband will love me now." Then it says, she conceived again. And when she gave birth to a son, she said, "Because the Lord heard that I am not loved, he gave me this one too." So she named him Simeon. So do you see the way in the Hebrew, the way in the Bible, multiple births are recorded? There's the conception, the birth. And then when the next brother comes along, there's a conception and a birth. So there are two conceptions and two births, with Leah giving birth to her sons. But notice how the wording is in the Bible in Genesis chapter 4. It says, Adam lay with his wife Eve, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. She said, "With the help of the Lord, I have brought forth a man." Later, she gave birth to his brother Abel. Notice there's only one conception, but there are two births. The later referred to there isn't a year later, 10 years later. It's a little time later, out popped the second child, Abel. So when we're talking about Cain and Abel, there's only one conception recorded, but there are two births. In fact, the ASV version of the Bible says this. She gave birth to Cain, and then it says again she gave birth to Abel instead of later. So it sounds more immediate. Even in the English, it sounds more immediate. And the Hebrew word for again is asaph, which means to add something. And in this case, the birthing of Abel was added to the birthing of Cain. And so I am convinced by these arguments that Cain and Abel were in fact twins. Cain the older, which is significant, and Abel the younger. And therefore, I believe, like Jacob and Esau, there would have been some sibling rivalry. Who doesn't have sibling rivalry? There's enough rivalry between me and my sister, and I'm born 5 years after her. But imagine the hustle and the bustle, a bit like the other two, Esau and Jacob and Esau. You know, I wonder what their lives were like. I wonder what was happening in the womb. Sibling rival was, in fact, I believe there was sibling rival, and more of that will come up later. But also, they chose certain professions. The Bible tells us, doesn't it, that they had different professions. There was Cain, there was Abel, and these were their professions. We read that. Do you know, I wish God would sometime fill in more of the detail. You have to hunt for it. But we have two professions, and here they are. The Genesis 4:2 says, and Abel was a keeper of sheep, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. Is there any significance in their professions? Actually, there is. So Abel was a shepherd, and Cain was a farmer. And funnily enough, when we think about it, and according to really, I suppose, the history of humankind, shepherding and farming are the two fundamental pursuits of civilized life. Shepherding with domestic animals and farming and producing food brings people together in civilization out of the Stone Age, if there ever was one. But it brings forth community. And there is a Hebrew tradition, and bear with me on this, it rises to a big point about Jesus, but there is a Hebrew tradition about the superiority or the better profession being shepherding rather than agriculture and city life. And there's a Hebrew idea that shepherding is more pleasing to Yahweh than tilling the ground, and I will explain why. If you think about it, Adam and Eve were only ever to tend the garden, to shepherd the garden. They were not intended to dig the ground. They were not intended to work the ground. They were not intended to plant this and that. God said, here it is. It produces everything for you. You eat what you want. And so, tilling of the ground actually has a bit of a meaning. What is the difference between shepherding and being the tiller of the ground? One central difference between shepherds and farmers is their relationship to nature. Shepherds tend to the sheep, while farmers cultivate. Shepherds coexist with nature, while farmers transform nature. To have a field of corn, you've got to dig and you've got to plow. You've got to cut down the trees. You are transforming the nature. It was not the intention of God for Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. So there are two strands. And is it significant that Abel was a shepherd and Cain was a farmer? Maybe it is. Here is something else about shepherds. Shepherds coexist with nature. Farmers tame and cultivate nature. And it's very interesting that in Hebrew thinking, from the biblical account of the choice of professions, they say your choice of profession actually says something about your character. Your choice, have you ever thought about this? Why did you do what you did? Why did you choose your profession? Does it say anything about who you are as a person? Your likes and your dislikes? Does it say anything about your character? I chose marketing. And the reason why I chose marketing is because I like lots of different things. I can't just stick with one thing. I like to do lots of different things. And in marketing, you've got PR, you've got advertising, you've got factories, you've got spending money. I mean, it's a very broad thing. And my character is quite a broad character. I like lots of different things. I like painting. I like playing the violin when I could. So, but from a Hebrew mindset, the profession that people choose seems to say something about their character. And there is a character issue with Cain, and there is a character issue with Abel. Their characters, to some degree, seem central to the story. But let's have a little look at their choice of profession in a bit more detail and see if we can get behind the way the Hebrew mindset works. If the brothers' profession says something about their personalities, and it was the farmer, Cain, who fell into sin, so in Hebrew thinking and in Hebrew culture, for millennia in Hebrew culture, because of the way they thought that what you did reflected your character, and it's the farmer who sinned, leaders of the Jewish people, they all wanted to begin their career as shepherds rather than farmers. Cain's choice of profession, indicative of his personality, is that he liked to challenge. He liked to subdue things. He liked to control things. In fact, Cain's name means acquisition. Everything in the Bible means something. Cain's name means acquisition. And possibly, in Cain's character and personality, possibly by working the land, it was a means for Cain to acquire wealth, to acquire property, to acquire things. If you think about it, agriculture demands all a person's physical strength. Cain is a tiller of the ground. The Hebrew word which is translated as tiller is oved, which literally means a servant, a servant. When Adam was expelled from the garden, he was sent out by God to till the ground, to become the ground's servant. Hence, Cain, the older twin, took on the profession of his father Adam, and in effect became a slave to the ground, a slave to the working of the ground. The ground that the farmer has worked is by the sweat of his brow. And if you know any farmers, they live it, they eat it, they drink it, they speak it. I knew a farmer, he used to sell bull sperm. He used to sell bull sperm around the place so that you can procreate beef, cattle. My goodness, what he didn't know. He was so passionate about it, it was absolutely incredible. You remember that, Helena, probably 25 years ago. But a farmer has to work the ground. He has to watch and see the ground bear fruit, and it becomes something of ultimate value to him. Delroy gave me a papaya, because I like to till the ground. It says something about my character. Delroy gave me a papaya. I cut the papaya, I took out the seeds, I washed them carefully, I planted them, and I ended up with about 100 papaya trees growing. They all sprouted. I was amazed. And I took a few, and I tended it. And in 18 months, it's now 6 feet tall, and I've got 2 papayas growing. That tree is very valuable to me. That tree is important to me. I have tilled it, I've nurtured it, I've sweat over it, and that tree is important to me. So it is with people who seek to acquire things or to grow things. Agriculture is very important. Now, of course, I'm not against agricultural farmers, don't get me wrong. and nor is God. But the principle in the character is this. Adam and Cain became servants of the ground. In a way, they became slaves to the ground, and they were living a life of slavery. We know that agriculture stimulates and develops civilizations. Most inventions and skills are accredited to agriculture. Settlement of the land is incredibly important for the formation of society, to create a state and a country, and out of that to have a culture, and out of that to have a culture of people. But being in a culture poses tremendous spiritual challenges to the farmer. If we go back to the agricultural societies of the old, you get land-grabbing landlords, lording it over tenants. You get wars and conflicts wanting land. The Ukraine is all about land. Russia wants the land back, wants the land to control and the people back. So wars over land and greed for it. The farmer is a slave to his field. Cain was a slave to his field. And the field draws him into it. He wants more. He wants a bigger harvest. He's working hard. He's easily bought into the land and his acquisition being more important than his relationship with God. It's a huge distraction. It takes up so much time. I did look up that the history people, the historians, have said that agricultural nations, out of agricultural nations, have developed all sorts of other religions away from the one true God. Out of coming together of people, there becomes idol worship, and it develops. So I wonder whether Cain, he wanted to work hard, but he wanted much. He became a slave to the ground. He was a tiller of the ground. And his desire was to acquire more. So what of Abel? What of Abel's choice of profession? Abel's choice is entirely different. In Hebrew thinking, the life of the shepherd is most elevated. In Hebrew thinking, being a shepherd is a really noble profession. He is concerned principally with living things. His care of them arouses within him humane feelings and sympathy for suffering of the animals. You know, I have to say, if my papaya tree got cut down, I'd be very sad. But if I was tending a sheep and the sheep died, I'd be mortified. There is a big difference. The flock needs the shepherd's care, but their existence, he doesn't plant a lamb seed and upputs a lamb. He just tends for them. He doesn't make them. He tends for them. He protects them. And he looks after them. He, in a way, a good shepherd puts himself before. They're so important. He'll lay down his life for the sheep. Jenny knows where I'm going. The profession of a shepherd does not occupy all of his strength and efforts. He's got more time on his hands. He can prayer walk, walking with the sheep, looking and talking to God. This is Hebrew thinking about professions. His spirit is invested in his labor to a lesser degree, and therefore he's more open to the wonders of God and to developing a relationship with God. And it is true, when you have a really hard, demanding job, and you put all your time in the hard, demanding job, God gets squeezed out. And that's the life that Cain seemed to be showing, because he missed some vital things, or he decided that he would do it a different way to what he knew God wanted, because he thought his way would be better. We come on to that next week. So the profession of a shepherd can remain more open to the creation, more open to humane values, looking after the sheep. And here we have some amazing examples, don't we? Of special note has to be Moses. 40 years in Egypt, the prince of Egypt, acquiring wealth, acquiring culture. He was the top man. He did a murder, And the next 40 years, he is humbled, and he became a shepherd for 40 years. The preparation for Moses to be the man of God and the prophet of God to lead the people out of Israel. Moses was a shepherd, and it humbled him, and it developed his relationship with God. Who else in the Bible was a shepherd? King David. David was a shepherd. David learned so many of his skills that he needed later on because he was a shepherd. The Bible describes Moses as the humblest man who ever lived, and David as a man after God's heart. No wonder in the thinking of the Hebrew, in Jewish thinking, no wonder shepherding. Well, that's way better. Cain the farmer, well, he produced the first murder. But Moses was a shepherd. King David, the man after God's heart, was a shepherd. Shepherds of the flock. And ultimately, as we're coming to an end very soon, ultimately, whilst Jesus used many farming analogies, Jesus was not a farmer. He identified himself with the occupation, with that of a shepherd. And Jesus said, I am the good shepherd. He didn't say, I am the good farmer. He said, I am the good shepherd. And so in Hebrew thinking, there's a big difference between Cain and his profession and Abel and his profession. We find tension between the tiller of the soil and the shepherd throughout history. Farmers versus herders. Tension. I want the land to grow crops. We want the land because we want to herd beef. And there are tensions. Obviously, land must be planted, food must be grown. We know all of that. But in Hebrew thinking, there is a character issue here about Cain, and his name means he wanted to acquire. He worked very hard, very laudable, but he was working on the wrong thing. Abel, on the other hand, is a shepherd. He's got time, he's pondering. Or maybe he's not only pondering, maybe he's got time for a bit of planning. I hope at the moment you're enjoying the story of Cain and Abel and all that is coming out of it. Having a more Hebrew perspective, I hope, is enlightening and getting you to think more about the story. It certainly does give more to the story, and there are more surprises to come as the story builds. We were never going to have time to do everything this evening. So we have explored in summary Genesis chapters 1 to 3. Tonight we have at least read the story. We have tackled some peripheral issues, and we've come up with some logical answers and questions from it. We have looked at where did Cain get his wife. You can ponder and think through that. We have established, I believe, that Cain and Abel were twins, not just brothers, they were twins, and something's coming out of that. And we've started to look at the characters about who they are by understanding their professions and understanding the Hebraic thinking surrounding professions. As always, there is more in the Bible than meets the eye. And next week, we really start to delve into who was Cain, who was Abel, what does Abel's name mean is a big clue for those who want to look it up. There are definitely some surprises. Tonight it looks like Cain got it all wrong. Next week we're going to hear a bit more of a balance. Or maybe Abel wasn't such a good guy either. And maybe there was more to this story than meets the eye. So next time we meet together, actually be in 2 weeks, but next time we will continue the Bible study on Cain and Abel, and we're really now starting to get right into the nitty-gritty. So I recommend you read chapter 4, verses 1 to 16, that you think through the issues that I have raised, that some of you, if you feel like it, you look up what the names mean and see if you can draw some of your own conclusions. And next time we're up, we'll get right into the nitty-gritty. Amen. Thank you. Amen. Helena.